Iowa Congressman Steve King was not allowed to fly on Air Force One during President Trump's trip to the Hawkeye State. King was reportedly disappointed, not about the lack of time with President Trump, but because he missed out on flying around in a big white airplane. King also doesn't blame President Trump because he blamed, well, you know. Shakira is facing 6 counts of fraud for not paying $16 million in taxes. So her hips don't lie, they just conceal income. And finally, Jupiter's moons will be visible later this month, but only if you toss it Mardi Gras beads. The Trump Report starts now.
You're tuned in to AfterBuzz TV, the ESPN of TV talk. Now, let the buzz begin.
Yes, indeed. Welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Christian Bladt, joined as always by Chelsea Galicia.
Hello there.
And Scott Moore.
Hey, guys.
And so much to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I often think, like, I just don't know where to begin. I just don't know what was the most fascinating and interesting thing from the past week, but I knew right away where I wanted to start this week. It's on a topic we don't usually talk about, which is astronomy. There's a little look. I think that as we all get older in age, we should be willing to admit that we don't know everything, and that we should be learning something. I hope that we learn something every single day. And I don't know about you, Chelsea, but I was fascinated to learn that Mars is part of the moon. Mm-hmm. And now I know Mars has moons, but it's apparently part of our moon. Did you know that before last week?
Wow, I don't know how to answer trick questions.
It's not a trick question. It is a statement that is out there on the internet, and the internet.
You would think that with all the education that I did have, that somewhere maybe in law school, it would, how to answer trick questions. Improv class, I don't really remember that preparing me for this moment. So really, I got nothing for you.
And Scott, the tweet from at Real Donald Trump, in case you're not following him,
Definitely not.
No, never will.
But you could be tempted to get into a back and forth with him, right? You don't want to just leave it to Mitch McConnell.
I tried to get him and everyone to antagonize.
I always feel like antagonizing President Trump online, if you do it at the right moment. Like, he's going to see it, and then you'll get into the whole thing. It just depends. Because I don't think there's not like, there's only a certain level of person that he's going to, engage in, somebody with X number of followers. No, it's like if you catch his eye, he's going to have something to say. So what he tweeted was, for all the money we are spending, NASA should not be talking about going to the moon. We did that 50 years ago. By the way, I agree with that part. I don't know what we would need to go to the moon for. They should be focused on the much bigger things we are doing, including Mars, parentheses, of which the moon is a part, defense, and science. I love that the tweet ends with science.
Mm-hmm. Exclamation mark.
Yes, and if this were the old days where we could play music on the way, we would have, of course, heard Blinded Me with Science, but by the great Thomas Dolby. Scott, again, nothing surprising anymore, but did you at least have to stop for a minute? Like, no. Because I had to make sure it was a real tweet. Because
I did too.
Yeah,
you thought the Onion had taken over his Twitter account?
But people do post, if you post a graphic, you can take his at Real Donald Trump and you can change what it says. Very easily. So I had to like really look and be like, there's no way this is real. But it was. So I actually admit I was surprised. Legitimately surprised.
I didn't even know how to respond to it because usually I love to make fun of them. And I'm like, I don't even know, like you were saying, like, I don't even know how to respond to that. What do you even say?
When somebody is too dumb to understand the insults, then what are we to do?
I know.
But
I mean, beyond that weirdness, again, it was him contradicting his own administration too, which was even crazier because I was trying to even think, okay, there's so many things to unpack here because first of all, Vice President Pence and NASA was talking about going back to the moon just like 2 weeks earlier.
Yeah, we talked about it on the show.
And the money and everything that they're spending towards it. And then all of a sudden now he's contradicting it on top of not having any clue what he's even talking about. So, like, there were so many things there. I had to leave it alone.
So the question is, what is he obfuscating? What is he trying to do?
That was my next question. Absolutely.
Oh,
so,
good.
no, it's fine.
Yeah.
So why does that tweet? And look, maybe he legitimately believes that. That's not the point. Why was it timed? What was going on at that moment, that we weren't paying attention to because we were too busy laughing at that. I don't know the answer, unfortunately.
I don't either, but I think
mission accomplished, by the way, because it definitely just whatever it was, I was distracted from it.
It was very distracting.
But we should probably
and very confused.
Yeah, I mean, we got to timestamp this. Like
That's
the
true.
times of his most outrageous. They're not. It's not even a lie. I don't think we could call it a lie. It's his.
No,
moments of
I think
painful
just
ignorance.
Maybe I don't know.
But somebody is looking out at like what happened at that time and like Congress and one of the committees, or like something happened around the country or the world that was maybe embarrassing to him, or I'm not exactly sure. But I mean, I guess this is taking some time away from talking about the fact that the Mexico deal is, maybe not a new deal. I mean, maybe this is just, give us something else to talk about. To distract from the other lie that he has told. So I hope and I pray that there are some swing voters that are just so that they can even still be surprised, that they're so surprised by this level of stupidity that they're like, I can't not vote for the other guy or gal this time around.
Right. Like they're so fed up, essentially. They're so tired of this ridiculousness, and that they'll really
like the children in being separated from their parents. If that wasn't enough for you, that kind of empathy type thing, you don't really care about kids and whatever. Okay, but maybe Moon and Mars being part of the Moon, or is the Moon part of Mars? I'm not sure which one.
Mars parentheses of which
is part of the moon.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe that is it. That is the line drawn in the sand.
I think you also run into the problem, and I'm not speaking for myself, but just, it's like the example I use all the time, that here in California, people voted for Arnold Schwarzenegger as governor because they thought it was funny that they could. So then it's just like, oh man, people are going to still want these. Maybe the next one is that the moon, it turns out, actually is made of green cheese, which we've long. But I've never seen proof that it isn't. I've seen, and I'm using air quotes for those not watching it, I've seen moon rocks. But did I get to taste them? No, I did not. Did I get to spread them on a nice Triscuit? I did not. So I don't know that it's not made of green cheese. So that could be the next day. So let's move on though. Scott, we often check on the impeachment clock, and I think that maybe it hasn't even been plugged in a while. It might be one of those like blinking 12 o'clock deals. Yeah. But I don't know if you know this, but I was reading that Saturday is actually Impeach Trump Day. It's a day of action with 133 events planned nationwide. And just last week, that number of planned events was 75. So now we're up to 133. So several groups are involved. One's called Indivisible. One's called Move On. That's the one that I've at least heard of by the People and nearly 20 other organizations. So some of the events will be protests, and some of them will include reading of pro-impeachment speeches from, and I don't know that they're actually going to be speaking at these events. I think people are going to read speeches written by Elizabeth Warren and Minnesota Representative, easy for me to say, Rashida Tlaib. This is, of course, not, and this is just more calling attention to it. To me, Chelsea, this feels a little echo chambery, because I feel like these events are geared towards people who, were already on board for impeachment. I don't know that, but I guess maybe if you're in a city where someone goes, well, there's a big crowd, let me go towards it, which is something I've never said in my life, by the way. I was like, there's a big crowd.
Yeah, I usually want to go against it. Yeah.
But what do you think about having all these events planned on a single day?
Sure. If this is our, practice at being engaged in the political process, then I am entirely supportive of it. And I do think that it might help shave some people off who are like, no, this isn't a good thing, to maybe be open to it, because at some point we may have to. When I say we may have to, the people who currently, including Nancy Pelosi, who are currently not on board for impeachment, if they see that enough people are at least accepting of it, understanding of it, and it's got some pretty big public support, I think that's terrible criteria for choosing to impeach a president or not, but it seems that this is something that Nancy Pelosi cares about, that it's not politically popular at this moment to impeach him. So, sure, if it does anything, and you know, I know so many people who by now are just turned off to politics at all on TV and things. So if they see an event in their community talking about this, maybe they'll give it a listen because it's something local.
What do you think, Scott? Do you think? Well, do you see any negatives from calling this attention to impeachment?
No, not at all. And I think kind of what you were saying, Chelsea, is it's important for Americans to have that freedom to be able to go out and gather and protest over whatever they feel they need to protest about. But I get what you're saying too about it being sort of the echo chamber. Will attract new people and maybe take another listen. I don't know if it will, but I think it's important for those that feel that it's their right to be able to protest and that they should. And there are a lot of issues there. And like you were saying, Chelsea, with Nancy Pelosi, it feels that she is, looking at the poll numbers too much, and her fear of it being bad for Democrats to go after this, which I've said all along, it shouldn't be after anything with polls. It should be thinking of not just this president and this Congress, but in the future. Because the more that you allow things to happen now is the more that you're setting precedents for both parties in the future. So a Democratic president could do the same thing when the Republicans are in the House and controlling things, and the tables will turn. And so I think it's just important to remember, just for the long-term checks and balances of the country, that impeachment should always be on the table. And because it's such a general topic too of what Congress deems is impeachable is a lot different than what you could be indicted for criminally, is also very different too. So those things are not mutually exclusive in that sense.
I don't think it'll take somebody who's like way on the no side and be like, oh yes, now totally.
Right.
But those people that are kind of in the middle, those are the people that
I think it's very important, and it's very important for people to be able to have that right as well.
And I think the thing about Pelosi, what the impression you get is, if she's sure that they would definitely be able to, actually pass impeachment, as it were. They know that they wouldn't get to remove him from office. I think that's the part. But I think the idea that there's any chance that they could go through impeachment hearings and then actually not impeach him, I think that's the disaster I think she wants to try to avoid, because then that's just, what a great endorsement from congressional Democrats for President Trump getting reelected next year. If it's like, see, look at that. That's another witch hunt that I was able to beat.
Right. That is true. If she feels any chance that she can't have a cohesive Democratic caucus to be able to vote in favor of it, but I do believe if it did go for a vote that the House would, it would definitely vote to impeach him. But I think it's that, and she's very calculated, and she wants to make sure whatever she's doing is done the most successfully, obviously. And I think if she could, she'd want to be able to see the Republicans vote for it. But I don't know what it's almost too cautious. And again, I think a lot of people, even going back to Mueller with the report, are playing with a different type of president than what they've been used to, and people that will actually adhere to the checks and balances. And Trump just doesn't adhere to anything, and people are still being too cautious and kind of playing the old game and not playing the new game that Trump wants to play, and it's to their own detriment. And I think it could also come back in the other way and hurt Democrats if they don't feel like the Democrats are taking the control to hold this president accountable. They're going to feel less reluctant to go out and less passionate to go vote against him and vote for their candidate for president, because they're going to feel like it doesn't matter what Democrats do. They're not going to do anything to rein him in. So.
Well, the vote for impeachment, we'd have a pretty good idea what it would look like, because there was a very strict party line vote earlier today to authorize the House Judiciary Committee and other panels to go to court to enforce their subpoenas of the Trump administration, something that Chelsea and I spoke with a few weeks ago when we had our guest, Royal Oaks. Just this idea that, yes, you can just ignore the subpoena for a while, but there will come a point where, you'll actually, I guess you'll be in contempt of court at a certain point. So this measure was adopted 229 to 191, which I guess is just the reminder that, even though Democrats got the House back, that's there's not a huge margin. I mean, yeah, sure, it's like 40, but I think that might also be something that Pelosi's thinking about. It's like, if we're not going to get 300 votes in favor of impeachment, just something about the number maybe doesn't look big enough. But Chelsea, because this is something that we spoke about, I did want to kind of touch on this. So, is there still a way at this point, even after this resolution, people are going to still be able to ignore it? Like, what has to happen for people to, these Trump administration people to actually be afraid of not showing up, basically?
Well, I don't know about these specific individuals.
Sure.
I don't know what keeps Don McGahn up at night. But, the courts have generally two ways of enforcing subpoenas or of holding somebody in contempt monetarily. They'll fine you by the day, by the hour, by however long until you show up, or by putting you in jail. So we'll see which of those is more motivating to people and which the courts feel is the right way to go. Because eventually they're in contempt of a subpoena, so there has to be something. And as far as I know, those are the only two real ways that the court will hold you responsible.
Yeah, and Scott, to the extent that you're familiar with the personnel, past and present, of the Trump administration, this seems to be the sort of thing that they're still kind of being encouraged to ignore it. So this probably doesn't change that much for them, as far as you.
No,
imagine,
I don't think it does. But like we were saying with the impeachment type things, it's again holding the checks and balances accountable, because if you don't pressure to keep adhering to the subpoena, and again Congress doesn't allow that to happen and they let it go, then again they're setting precedents like anything else down the road for future presidents to ignore Congress and their subpoenas, and therefore you've now weakened the checks and balances, and now you have an imperial presidency that's above any other government and the legislative branch, and so we just can't have that. So we have to be able to withhold subpoena power.
I think Democrats would be well served to start using the term, we're getting sliding towards authoritarianism when you just have the one guy, the one branch leading or trampling on the other two. And so I think this is, again, an opportunity or a mistake on the Democrats' part as a party for not making the case better for why there is oversight, for why there is independence amongst the three branches of government, and that this is an opportunity for all of us to preserve our democracy, because if we don't, then what comes next? We got one guy, call it what you want, an authoritarian, we got a dictator. What is it that you call it when one guy is calling the shots and there's no one to keep him accountable? Right. I don't hear enough people talking about that. I think I hear them say oversight, oversight, oversight. I understand what that means, but I don't think that word has enough emotional charge for people to really get on board with why it's so important. And I think if you start framing it in terms of what Republicans use, this is law and order, this is the Constitution, they say strict interpretation, they use like the letter of the law, they want to see what's in black and white in the Constitution. So we have to start using those terms that they use to start saying, hey, we're the party of the Constitution here, and you're undermining it. Right,
and exactly what you're saying. I think the messaging has been not strong enough in this case, and in a lot of other cases with Trump. And it, again, seems like they're playing by the old rules again, and they're just letting things go and not have good, clear messaging and oversight to the everyday voter doesn't mean anything, because the everyday voter, that might be a swing voter, or as a Republican, is like, oh, whatever, you're just upset because of Trump, got away, got cleared by the Mueller report, and you won't let it go, kind of thing. So you have to be able to be clear on exactly what is happening, because again, like you said, what happens next? Does Trump declare martial law and cancels the 2020 election? Or is Congress going to say anything to that? How far will he take it? And the more that you allow him to get away with means that he's going to keep pressing further and further down the road into where it's a point to where does that end? And it is a little bit scary, but it's also important for the everyday voter to know that there are checks and balances, that Congress is equal to the president, not beneath the president, not subservient to the president, and that there is a distinct ability to be able to check what he's doing, and that's exactly what the Democrats were voted in for by a huge margin in 2018 for that very purpose, as well as other things.
To the third co-equal branch of government to also help Congress hold the executive branch, the president, accountable,
and also not be another not be politicized either, which is what's happening.
Yeah.
Not to spend too much time on this, but I think we haven't actually spoken about him on the show yet. So I did notice that the Michigan Republican, Justin Amash is how I assume you say his name. I've only ever really read it. He's the lone Republican lawmaker who has called for President Trump to be impeached, which will just tell you a lot about, sort of party politics. I feel like if we're reversed, we're Democrats, who probably wouldn't have that many people, deviating from, well, this is our guy, and let's at least stand by until there's something credible. But so Amash he had to resign. Well, he didn't have to. He chose to resign from something that's called the Freedom Caucus, which I find interesting because I guess because he felt that he had the freedom to have an opinion that was different, but he does not, especially after President Trump called him a loser and a lightweight. It's loser gets thrown around so much. There's so many people that he thinks are losers, but so he said that he only called for impeachment to get attention through controversy. It's entirely possible, but Trump said that about Congressman Amash, and I don't even know how to say his name, but I certainly hadn't heard of him beforehand.
Oh, you hadn't? Oh.
Well, before this, you know what I mean? It's there's a lot. There's 535 people. Yeah. I probably like 20 of them. If you really get down to it, and then there's like another then there's like the worst of the worst that you just know who they are. Yeah. Sort of like the people whose faces you expect to see on those like FBI wanted posters up at the post office. But are you, again, this isn't are you surprised question, but what do you think? I mean, this is completely hypothetical, Chelsea. In terms of like privately, do you think that there are a lot of, or at least a significant number of Republicans that, should it have come down to it, maybe it would have to be an election year or something, they'd be running for re-election. Do you think that there's more than one Republican that actually would support impeaching President Trump?
Ooh. Wouldn't I love to know?
Well, because let me just the footnote is obviously if you impeach Trump and you do remove him from office, you'll still have a Republican president no matter what happens. You know what I mean? So they're not going to lose. People might think that means that Hillary becomes president. I don't know, but somebody might think that. So anyway, Sarah, what were you going to say?
I don't even remember what I was going to say. I mean, the idea of actually having Pence as president doesn't do much for me either. So
I bet he knows the difference between Mars and the moon just on that one issue. I'm just going to put that one issue out there. That might be a difference. The
only thing that Pence might do is actually, and I don't know this to be true at all, is respect the Constitution and respect the ways in which things are done. Like, when people get served with subpoenas, that they are told, yeah, you better show up because that's how it works around here in D.C., since we follow the letter of the law and the Constitution.
Pence is someone who I think adheres to some of the language of the Constitution, that all straight white men are created equal. I think he feels pretty strongly about that.
But man, I don't know. I don't know if it requires like being able to read the Constitution and having a conscience for a Republican who's currently silent to actually say, you know what, if I'm doing what's right, if I'm upholding the oath that I made to this country and to the Constitution, and if I can read correctly, and this is what the Constitution makes me do, is that I have to hold everybody accountable for what their duties are, and if they fall short, then you have to vote to impeach. But it takes a whole lot of, I guess, a big conscience, and I just don't have faith that the party or that too many of them have enough of a conscience. I think that's like partly sort of a joke, except I was reading an article earlier this week or last week about sociopaths and how frequent the rate of sociopaths are in this country. It's actually very high in this country compared to other countries, which not sure what that's saying about us, but literally 1 in 25 people. So a normal classroom is still 30 people. One of those people in a classroom has no conscience, has very little, if any, ability to empathize, and who has no regard for anybody's feelings or what's right or anything like that. And of course, they say that the CEOs, particularly of banks, politicians, and other professions, have a higher incidence of sociopaths. And I'm wondering if Elizabeth Warren should, 'cause she has a bill for everything, should have the Prevent Sociopaths in Congress and the White House bill, where we actually test people for this. And maybe that doesn't take them out, but we all should know if they have a conscience or not, right? Because I would want to know that. I almost want to know that more than I want to know the tax situation, although that's needed for emolument stuff.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm big on...
and to know if they're a sociopath, so you also know what they're involved in.
I was going to say, thankfully, we live in Hollywood where we don't have to worry about... No. We don't have to ever worry about running into sociopaths, because everybody's on the up and up here. I did want to move along to our
Christian's like, I'm not going near that sociopath thing, but I'm dead serious. I think that should be the next movement, is transparent sociopathy in politics.
I mean, that's kind of like asking Congress to vote for a pay decrease, because I think just the act of running for a national office already you have to have some kind of tendencies.
Can you imagine being the one who is against that? I don't want...
I mean,
can you publicly say?
Did I just think of 5 people in the Senate who would definitely be against it, because they probably feel like it describes themselves. Some of whom maybe Scott tweets at regularly.
Right.
But no, it's one of those things where rationally, of course, it makes so much sense. But I think some people are like, hey, wait a minute, that's a little too close to home.
Right.
What I do want to talk about is this deal with Mexico that thank God that President Trump was able to strong arm his way into getting Mexico to agree that I guess that they should be keeping an eye on their southern border. That seemed to be the main thing. The interesting thing about this for me, Scott, is the reports, which of course have immediately been denied and declared fake news by President Trump, that this deal was actually in place a month ago, but he just made the big show of I'm going to do these tariffs on Mexico. And my favorite part of this is he had that sheet of paper up today. And he's like, I want to tell you, but Mexico won't let me. I feel like
God.
There have been a lot of, we live in a post-truth society.
Right.
There's been a lot of look.
I know,
for who we're talking about, and it's a little fast and loose with the rules. I think that again, nothing should really surprise us, but the idea that he would need to wait for Mexico's permission to do anything seems highly unlikely. What do you think about just sort of all of it? You can weigh in on the sheet of paper, the tariffs, any and all of it, Scott.
Well, I mean, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, which I hope that middle ground swing state voter is paying attention to this type of stuff and is like, enough with the circus. It's so ridiculous. And it would be funny if it was an episode of Veep, or if this was not a real life stuff, but for a president of the United States to take it out of his coat and say, here, this is the deal, but I can't say anything, which of course we know is a complete blatant lie. And also, when would you ever have any kind of notes scratched on this is a major deal that you're doing on 2 lines, it looked like?
Right.
The whole thing is just so absurd and stupid, and regardless of what was going on or not, and for them to watch their southern border, the tariffs again are us paying for it, just like we're paying for the wall. It's not them that's paying for it. It's being imported to us, and Americans are paying for it. And it's just, the whole thing is so ridiculous, so absurd, that I really don't have anything else to say about it, because it's idiotic.
Well, I hope that in the days ahead we're able to use state-of-the-art technology and zoom in on that piece of paper. My suspicion is that it is actually a KFC takeout menu that happened to be in his jacket pocket, although I'm sure he has his order in his head. Like, he doesn't really need it, but it's more to let somebody else, just like, here's what you got to get me. So we'll see. Chelsea, do you think that President Trump would like to tell us, but Mexico says, no, you're not allowed to? Do you think that that's fairly accurate?
Absolutely. I don't want to keep saying, I don't know. I guess I'm absolutely.
Just want to make you say, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sure. But, again, so let's just say that you are preventing more people from coming in. Okay, that feels like a win. Except that the problems that gave rise to why they're leaving and our involvement in them is not going to end there.
Exactly.
It just doesn't work that way. And I know it can just seem, well, like, why wouldn't it end that way? You just logically, you place a barrier of people, and then those people in those countries cannot come here.
They're stuck there.
End of story. We're safe. But it doesn't work like that. I don't know how to describe it, but
that's what I'm saying. It's insane.
It can't, it's like karma doesn't quite explain it, but we did things that have consequences, and I don't know what people think happens when you just try and like step on the consequences. It's like consequences, they're not there, but they will end up coming up, and usually even worse than they would have. So unless there is a real effort here to diminish the demand for drugs, unless there is a real effort to help clean up the corruption and the overtake of those countries by corporations that help make mostly our food incredibly cheap, and starts giving these people a way to make a living for themselves and to stand up for themselves when they're threatened that if they don't aid a cartel, I don't know which, that they're going to be killed or their family's going to be killed. Like, these are real things that are happening, that if we really want to solve this problem, we would be more strategic about this. But just placing human barriers to prevent people from coming up is just like stepping on, I don't know, a firework. It can't see it for a minute, but then it's going to blow up and it's going to make things worse. So,
and it's like, where does that end? Like you said, like helping to quell the violence and the reasons why people are leaving their homeland to begin with. Like we always talk about, nobody wants to leave where they're from. They don't want to leave where they've grown up and their family is from and take their kids on this risky expedition across, especially this time of year in the deserts in the 110-degree heat. Nobody wants to do that. And it's, again, very pretentious to think otherwise, that people are doing this just because they're just going to come in and they're going to live off of the U.S. government and all this ridiculousness. And again, like you were saying, we started these issues, and by just putting up a wall and pretending like it doesn't exist anymore doesn't mean it just goes away forever. And it's like a domino effect. Where does that end? Then is there now a southern wall and the Mexican Guatemala? Is there a wall between Guatemala and Nicaragua and El Salvador and Costa Rica and Panama?
It's a whole series of walls
going all the way down to. I mean, it's just so silly. But that's what I'm saying. It's so silly. It doesn't do anything.
We only have about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to talk a little bit about 2020. Hey, it's coming. That's not that soon, though.
That's my hashtag. I always say to all the fools, like Mitch McConnell. Hashtag 2020 is coming.
Yeah, I mean, Election Day won't actually be for, 17 months. But that's not really stopping the ever-increasing number of candidates, and as we know that there will be one debate over 2 nights later in the month, and some of the lower, let's put it a little nicely, some of the lower polling declared presidential candidates are not that happy with the way that the system is set up. Personally, I think it's not strict enough. I think if once you have it over 2 nights, look, anybody who wants to run for president sure can, but I personally think that it really is diluting the pool to have this many people, and I know we haven't had any debates yet, but it's too many. I don't know. I mean, there's kind of a reason why the familiar faces and names are the ones that are polling well, because it's like, oh yeah, I know who Joe Biden is.
But what is the harm as you see it with having, I mean, even if it was 80 people right now, all right,
which it
whatever.
might be by the end of the month. It could easily be 80 people, by the way.
But what they're fighting against is the perception that the DNC went out and handpicked, oh, we like you, and we put you in, and we groom you and shape you, and that it's not a true democracy, that there is a lie that you get a choice. And to some extent, I agree. When the two candidates, the Republican and the Democratic, are picked by whatever the machinery is of politics, then yeah, we're given this appearance of a choice, but it's really a false choice because we had no say in who got up there in the first place. So maybe you're right that this is a bit too much, and maybe it would be called an overcorrection. But I mean, yeah, it's a lot, and maybe it makes our work a little harder. We've got a lot of names to keep up with and positions and
a lot
stuff.
of studying to do.
But
That's right. I was up late at night poring over Seth Moulton's website. It's my favorite.
But I think that I would rather too many than too few.
Yeah, I agree with you. I go back and forth on it in the sense, and look, and we all know this from the past, that the machinery did pick, the candidates way before there was, any kind of primaries, and the primaries were meant to open it up to make it appear that the people were picking these people. A lot of times they were still handpicked by each of the parties' machinery. So I think it is important, but I also go back and forth and thinking, like, I'd love to hear everyone's opinions, and then I feel like maybe after the first debate, some of those people maybe should look either at running for something that might be a better fit, like in the sense of the Senate. Like, I do think about some of the candidates, like John Hickenlooper in Colorado, that still come back to me, and Steve Bullock in Montana, where I feel, okay, it'd be great to hear from them in the debate, but are they going to get traction down the road, and could they hopefully be able to still, like Marco Rubio did, still go back and run for Senate seat or something that they might be able to plausibly win in their state to be able to help Democrats down the road. So that's where I kind of have that back and forth, where I think, okay, some of these people may not be able to rise to the top after a couple debates, and maybe they should think about running for something where they could have a say.
I'm sure they are.
Which I'm hoping, because, yeah, some of them I just feel, but I would love to be able, like you said, I'd love to hear from everybody and hear from all the different ideas, and then hopefully those best ideas from all those candidates can be also incorporated into the platform and as we move forward in the primary to the candidate that ends up winning.
I think probably that's the situation for at least one that I know of. Like, I know the candidate Andrew Yang. His whole thing is, if somebody else is going to, be a voice for this issue, which is of automation and the fact that maybe we need something like the universal basic income to fight it off. He's like, fine, I don't have to be a part of this. He's just giving the issue a platform. And I'm sure maybe there are others like that. So again, I don't see the harm. Maybe it would just be less complicated for us. But the other side of that is that fewer ideas. We hear, I think this is probably where we get some of the better ideas. And when we have candidates trying to differentiate themselves, trying to be more moderate or more progressive, that this is where the bench of new ideas comes from. I mean, think of what happened in the primary last time, that a lot of Bernie's ideas became more mainstream. So there might be people that are just, I want to put more attention on certain issues. I'm going to run for president. Sure. And maybe it works to advance the issue, and I'm all for that.
And I'm too. I think it's very important, especially as we move forward. And having less choice does not mean it's better. If we just had Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, I mean, it's good to be able to have all different backgrounds, and as we are now. But as we move forward. Yeah. I hope we can see that field winnow.
When you have this many, they are fighting for attention and eyeballs, and they have to differentiate themselves, and they have to come up with better ideas and articulate things better. And so, he said it that way. That really resonated with people. And so whoever does become the candidate can, borrow that language, say that really resonated with people. And so I think it's better for the party.
Yeah, I think that the
country,
the devil's advocate part of this is you're definitely taking away from people who will get a chance to actually be running for president, by there being this many. But I think that, yes, sure, it's like I said, it's a year and a half out. So And I think that we'll see a few people probably fall off pretty quickly after the debates, because if your fundraising doesn't increase at all off of that, then you realize, okay, so even if you have like a really good soundbite and your team makes a great meme out of it in some way, and you still don't raise that much money, it's like, all right, well, what are we going to do? Try to hang on for another month for the next debates. So look, it'll be interesting to see, because I think we've gotten the list of, who some of the moderators will be, and because the first one's by MSNBC, it's some very familiar NBC/MSNBC personalities. So you like to think that everybody will get, at least maybe not 100% equal time, but at least, somewhat comparable time, and that if they ask tough questions of any candidate, I hope they ask of all of them. I feel like we've watched some of these larger debates, different networks, different parties in recent years, where you feel like they're definitely favoring those who are polling way ahead. Joe Biden will probably get some extra questions, but
he's gonna have like a golden podium or something.
And like the softball questions are given to this candidate versus other ones where you feel, okay, they're a little bit more intense. So yeah, I'd like to be able to see that too, where it is even keeled in that sense, because we've definitely seen that in the past.
But speaking of Joe Biden, because this happened just a little while ago before we started our show, President Trump doing some nice way of indirectly endorsing Joe Biden, tweeting that he is a dummy and that he is the weakest mentally in the field. This was as President Trump was heading for Iowa. I don't know. Chelsea, do you think it could be effective that if you have maybe video of President Trump calling you a dummy, the weakest mentally, maybe cut it together against things that President Trump has said, and you just come on at the end and you say, I'm Joe Biden and I endorse this message.
And I know that the moon is not part of Mars.
Right, yeah, exactly. He's like, this is the moon, and he's holding up a picture. He's like, and this is Mars. Look how far apart they are from each other. I don't know. I feel like being in his crosshairs could, to me, it's free advertising for a guy that everybody already knows is running for president, sure. But, and do you, the actual direct question about this, do you think it's because Biden is who he most wants to run against? So he continues to just hammer away mostly at him.
I don't know if that's who he wants to run against, but I think it's pretty... it feels very obvious at this moment. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are 2 and 3, and I'm sure actually he would love to go up against either one of them. But Biden's up front right now, and so that's who he's going to go after.
I think that's the same thing. He wants to go after him because he's in front, and I also think he's the most scared of him in the sense that it's basically having this, I don't want to say the same person, but, gaffe-prone Biden, who is the folksy, white, older male that comes from a certain region of the country that is most likely that had voted for Trump to most likely switch back over to the Democratic camp. And I think he's afraid of that because he knows Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin were basically lucky that Trump won those in 2016, and there's a very good chance that all three of those states will go back in the Democratic column, as we saw in 2018, how they all went for Democratic governors and Democratic senators by huge numbers. So his campaign has to be looking at that and being very scared, thinking, okay, Biden could come in and steamroll, being from Pennsylvania, and take those states back. And he has a very hard shot. There was one poll that had Biden leading in Texas, and a couple other candidates with Sanders and Warren being right there in Texas. So I think that campaign has to be very scared, knowing they kind of won by luck in 2016, and that to be able to keep that going is going to be already difficult. That they've started targeting other states, which I feel they have no chance in winning anyways. Trump's going after Nevada and
I said he was going to Oregon,
New Mexico, Oregon, states. Minnesota, I could see because that was always very close last time, but it has, and it hasn't gone for a Republican president since Nixon in '72. So, but they're targeting states I feel that they're not going to be able to win, and they're going to have a hard time holding the upper Midwest. And so I think they feel Biden is one of those candidates that could definitely peel away from them, and that's why he's trying to go after him early, because I think, like you said, he'd much rather go after Bernie or Elizabeth in the general, because then you could paint them as, socialists and, be able to get the campaign out that way, where Biden's more of a moderate.
Right, but also, I mean, Biden, Bernie, and Elizabeth Warren are all people that he's got a long track record of, sort of characterizing in a very specific way. So it's kind of easy to just keep it up. But we cannot keep it up because we are out of time already, and there's so much that we left.
I'm like, the clock stopped, the impeachment clock.
The impeachment clock stopped
11 seconds. We can keep going.
Hey, we might be 11 seconds from impeachment. We don't know. But we will be back next Tuesday, and I believe our friend Tamara will be back with us next week. But until then, Scott, where do people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at sman80. That's SMAN80.
And Chelsea, where do people find you?
Chelsea Galicia.
And you can find me at ChristianDMZ on Twitter and Instagram. Thanks so much to everybody who tuned in, and we will see you next Tuesday at 4 Pacific, that's 7 Eastern. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Our founder, Kevin Undergaro, and me, Maria Menounos, would like to thank you for tuning in to AfterBuzz TV. Remember, we're not just the first, we're the biggest in the world, and we're the only destination for all your favorite TV shows. Whatever you crave, we've got it. So go to AfterBuzzTV.com and check out our lineup. Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.